Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. Apparently, it's time to stop pretending that eSports are, quote, real sports, unquote, according to this rather nice little article here by Recode.net. Something of a straw man, to say the least, because I have not at any point in my 6 or so years in the eSports industry, I suppose, ever heard anybody claim that eSports are sports, or that pro gaming is a sport. They've not attempted to do so because there's never really been a need to do so. Esports are esports. That is why they are called esports and not sports. It's a fairly obvious distinction, one would think. It's an attempt to deliberately divide the two things while simultaneously invoking images of competition, which is, of course, exactly what esports is, competition. There's also a reason why we don't call pro gamers athletes. We call them pro gamers or competitive gamers, because that's exactly what they are. It is exactly the same reason why we do not call poker players athletes or chess players athletes, regardless of the fact that they are both legitimate competitions in and of their own right. And according to the Olympic Committee, chess is actually a sport, which would, at least in my honest opinion, were I to have any desire to go that far, mean that pretty much anything competitive when it comes to gaming can be a sport. It's not like there's any athletic ability required to play chess. Similarly, there's a reason why NASCAR is called a motorsport and Formula 1 is called a motorsport, and is more often than not referred to merely as a motorsport as opposed to just a straight-up sport. Why? Because it requires a different skill set. It is not a traditional athletic sport, ergo the attempt to differentiate. It's completely unsurprising, of course, that the reaction to the ESPN 2 broadcast of the Heroes of the Dorm Final Four was met on Twitter by some derision, as well as, of course, a few rather elderly commentators claiming that this was an abomination and that they would rather put a gun in their mouth, which might not be a terrible idea, but before you do that and force the poor janitor to clean up the remains of your grey matter from the floor, might I recommend just being perhaps a little bit more open-minded. I really do think that this entire argument is a gigantic straw man. Who exactly is arguing that these are sports? Is it the fact that they are merely present on ESPN? Because many things have been present on ESPN that are not traditionally defined as sports, including, of course, poker and Magic the Gathering. These are not sports per se, but they are certainly competitive, and there's a lot of money on the line for these particular activities. The article goes on to claim that the game itself is difficult to watch for those who haven't played it, and for most channel surfing viewers, it's an easy invitation to yell nerds and then keep clicking. The article then goes on to claim that this is an ongoing problem, and that the lack of respect from non-players is an issue. Well, I don't think it is an issue, frankly, because one, channel surfing is going the way of the dodo. Cable consumption continues to fall, and it's indeed only large sporting events that seem to be even keeping cable alive at this point. Even HBO, that staunch steadfast of cable, has unbundled for those who happen to be Apple users. You can now subscribe to HBO Now, which gives you all of the HBO content on demand without any need for a cable connection. And this is after they stubbornly stuck with HBO Go for God knows how long, which did require a cable subscription. So even HBO is saying, this whole channel surfing thing with cable, it seems to be going out the window, doesn't it? It appears to be becoming outmoded, and it is. And in a video that I did last year in regards to Twitch and why people watch as a response to a BBC report that was unfortunately rather ignorant and condescending on the subject, I argued that on-demand culture is something that we are living in right now. It's not something that's going to happen in the future. We are already there. And as a result, there is a particular demand for so-called niche content. The strange thing about niche content, of course, is that gaming is far from niche, and these games have millions upon millions of players, and we have plenty of examples of these video game tournaments attracting huge numbers of international viewers, including, of course, the World's Tournament for the LCS, that being the League of Legends Championship Series, supposedly broadcasting to 27 million unique viewers over the course of a number of days. It should be noted, of course, that these viewers eclipse quite significantly a number of traditional sports, and yet can do so on a much lower budget. There is certainly a demand for esports content, competitive gaming, or whatever it is you want to call it, and it continues to grow. And the fact of the matter is that it doesn't really matter what it's branded as. We've had the fighting game community being resistant to the term esports for a very long time. And frankly, I'm not particularly attached to it myself. I just use it for the sake of it. Competitive gaming works just as well, and frankly, it doesn't matter whether you call it a sport or you don't call it a sport, because it has the viewership, and that's all that really matters to the people that have the money. If you're looking for sponsorship, if you're looking for monetary investment, if you're looking for broadcasting rights, and if, of course, you are paying attention to the size of the audience, those are the things that actually matter. It's irrelevant as to whether or not it is actually called a sport, and it is not an identity problem. Who exactly amongst the esports viewership is making an impassioned argument for these to be regarded in the same way as traditional sports? Who? I mean, to me, it seems like a complete straw man. The article goes on to say that calling these games sports is like calling YouTube videos television shows. Yes, but who's doing that? Nobody is, and it doesn't really matter. This is the on-demand culture now. In this particular generation, we ask for a specific kind of entertainment that is tailor-made to our needs. And as a result, we have gone to places like Twitch and YouTube in order to find it because it's not catered to by traditional broadcasters. And as a result, traditional broadcasters are suffering. I've got plenty of videos on my own channel that eclipse the number of views that a more traditional television program would have, and they run on a $0 budget. It's that simple. All I need is my time in order to create these pieces of content, and they're generating huge numbers of views. And I am not exactly the biggest player on YouTube. Not even close. Social Blade ranks me as 730th on YouTube by my subscriber rank and 663rd by video views. So there are 663 more channels that are bigger than mine. And yet my videos are pulling in huge numbers, certainly more than enough to sustain the company. That's the direction that we're going in at the moment. And what my videos are called and what they're classified as is frankly completely irrelevant to the numbers that they're pulling in. The article is splitting hairs and really nothing but that, and in fact it seems to be putting in a greater effort to brand something as a sport so that they can simultaneously then debunk the idea that anybody involved in esports is. There are no pro gamers running around demanding to be called athletes. The only recognition that they require as an athlete is the ability to acquire an athlete's visa in order to travel. And that's really only because there isn't a specialized visa for esports competitors and pro gamers at this point because the law simply hasn't caught up to it. It was a similar situation when I moved to the United States. I did so on an O1B visa, which is traditionally reserved for people like news anchors and sports commentators. And I was able to do so entirely off the back of my YouTube productions and my contribution to esports as an esports or professional gaming commentator, whichever you would like to call it. And really, nobody minds what you call it, because all that advertisers really care about are the numbers. They care about the demographic. And frankly, what you're looking at in terms of a demographic is one that is rather attractive to a great deal of companies. We're looking at a primarily male audience aged between 25 to 34, tech-savvy, generally with disposable income, with a large number of people who are college educated. That is a quite nice demographic for a great number of products. And indeed a different set of products that are advertised during traditional sports events. And frankly, even that is something that's changing over the course of time. As we've seen in the last few years, gaming products in particular have taken pride of place amongst Super Bowl advertisements, with 3 different video games paying huge amounts of money to advertise during the Super Bowl this year. There is a crossover, there's really no doubt about that. So one has to ask whether or not this demand to be taken seriously as a sport is in fact merely a straw man and a phantom created by certain media organizations to then argue against. We're not asking for equal treatment when it comes to being treated as a sport. Where's the benefit to that? There isn't one. Really, all one needs to be successful as an esport is a large number of viewers and enough sponsors, which, by the way, esports really aren't having too many problems acquiring at this point. You know, I think this would be kind of a cool article if it actually bothered to explain why esports and traditional sports are differentiated, but it doesn't. It's very, very odd, isn't it? And to be honest, it's not entirely unexpected. We're well aware that after some backlash, which was quite frankly very limited to Twitter, and let's be honest, everything gets a backlash on Twitter. That's not significant news under any circumstances, and it surprises me repeatedly when news and media organizations refer to Twitter as some kind of source. Look, people are angry. Yes, people are also angry about everything else. This is not newsworthy. It is not newsworthy that some people did not like the fact that Heroes of the Storm was broadcast on ESPN too. But since we don't know the numbers, we don't know how popular it actually ended up being, their protests are frankly irrelevant. All that really matters are the numbers. Did it bring them in? And if it did, then that's a good enough reason for sponsors and networks to actually pay attention. I don't think anybody, at least to my knowledge, in the esports space is attempting to push esports as a sport because they realize there is actually no benefit to doing so. They just open themselves up to pointless debates over the nature of the content, which frankly has no relevance to advertisers and certainly no relevance to spectators. The people that like esports are going to like esports whether or not it's called esports, competitive gaming, or Garble Glob. It doesn't matter. I'll watch Garble Glob, no problem whatsoever, as long as it happens to have the content that I'm interested in watching. The fact of the matter is there's an audience for it and that audience continues to grow. There is a clear benefit to advertising during these events and to sponsoring these particular tournaments. Esports events are surprisingly cheap to put on relative to the number of viewers they actually receive. So it would appear to me that if this is some kind of underground movement pushing its way into the mainstream, then whether or not it's called a sport is perhaps the least relevant part of that push. My name's been TotalBiscuit, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.